Welcome everyone. Today we have another new session. Then this session we will discuss about energy transition and resource allocations. So we have our expert panelists, and already they are very famous through our World Talent Economy forums because they really like our sessions. Always I am getting very good feedback from around Asia Pacific from Mr. Rob. Uh, how we want to know more about this like topic, energy transitions and resource allocations. Then I request Mr. Jamesid, then Professor Donald. I want to start from Professor Rob. So how do you want to analyze, sir, for today's sessions and especially today's topic?
Well, we're in the middle of a transition from petrochemical fuel sources to recoverable sources. You get me right up, I'm still not awake. So moving to things like solar power, wind power, geothermal, and hopefully revitalizing some of the nuclear power efforts, so that we're using more sustainable fuel sources than we have historically. And of course, this is causing a major shift in terms of where the energy comes from, who benefits from the harvesting the energy, and it's also showcasing some shortfalls. Energy storage being the biggest shortfall in terms of using some of these sustainable energy resources. We don't have a good yet have a good technology to store the energy, so that these energy sources that don't run 24/7 are viable to replace more traditional fuel plants that are using coal, oil, or natural gas. So this transition is going to take a while. There's a lot of promise in terms of energy storage. I think there's some 200 companies in the United States alone that are working on innovative ways to store energy. Some of the more promising things, like liquid sodium, didn't pan out. They were just too expensive and too inefficient. And one of the more interesting ones was using a high-speed flywheel to store energy. But once again, that didn't scale well at all, and the bearing wear was rather pronounced. So we're still kind of struggling with energy storage. If we can get energy storage viable, get the efficiency up, it'll cause a whole lot of changes. But that's one of the restrictions. The other thing would be if we massively switch up to one of the 24/7 energy production methods, nuclear or geothermal, we could work through it that way. But wind and sun look so promising, as does offshore. Harnessing the energy of wave motion also looks pretty promising, though we still have transmission problems. Recognize with energy, we're generally talking about electricity, and with electricity you have transmission loss, which means increasingly we're thinking of putting the generating capability much closer to the people that are using the energy to make up for that transportation loss. So a lot of stuff going on, a lot of innovation and development going on in this area, and it's going to change an awful lot of things. The least of which are, for instance, some gas stations, production of plastics, all things tied to petrochemical market will change dramatically probably by the end of the decade, and certainly over a period of 2 decades if trends continue. A lot of the things we've gotten used to will be dramatically reduced or gone.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. We have our new guest, Mr. Akku Chaudhary, and he's also a climate activist. He's from Nepal. He lives in Himalaya, and he has a great corporate career. He was a big one of the largest corporation managing director from Bangladesh, but now he believes in small is beautiful, and he expand his life in Himalaya. So hello, how are you, sir? How do you want to share your experience? Because your journey is very interesting.
I'm good.
Because now you live in Neville. Yes. So, sir, we are discussing about energy transmission and resource allocation, sir. So you are also expert on that particular field. So how you work in Nepal as a climate activist?
Thank you very much. Thank you. I would rather like to listen because I'm not an energy expert, and these are the information that will really help us, because we live in the remotest place. And as you said, I'm become a climate activist, because I am in the frontier of the climate that we are facing. So for me, I made a move to this space where we want to show that we want to fight that and face the challenges of living in a place where we don't have water. I'm coming from a place which is the delta, where there's plenty of water. There's more water than we can handle. But here, where the source of the water is, for the last 6 months, we have no water source because we depend on the natural water, because the water is drying up. It's the energy crisis, the climate crisis that is facing, and we can experience it. So what we have to do is not give up. So we try to mm, create our own. But luckily, they have the electricity, which is plenty of that. But then again, the hydroelectricity, the problem is because they have to bring it through the wires, and there is a storm. There's things happening constantly. The climate, we are totally dependent on nature, and nature acts in her own ways. And so when we have a breakage, there's a blackout for maybe sometime for a couple of days, because it's up on the hills. It's very difficult to get the wires. So as I'm listening to all of you experts on energy, because that's one of the very important things. So how we can come up with the best solution is what I would like to listen rather than talk, because even here we have a lot of
Yes.
trees, a lot of forests, but the forests are getting wiped out because people need the fire to cook, because they don't have in many places the electricity reaching to their homes, even though they are producing enough hydro energy. So the thing is that how we can have that energy from other sources, even from like solar. Again, solar is is difficult because the sun is not always shining around here. Thank you. I think.
Thank you. I know that you have
Yeah.
a very
Thanks a
interesting
lot.
story
And
because
please,
yes,
I would like to listen
yes.
to the gentleman.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Jamesit. So how do you want to analyze today's topic?
Thank you.
Thank you for having me on, Sharif.
Jamesit.
And what we just heard is a story of a local situation facing local challenges, but it's a global problem now, and the challenges facing every locality is going to be changing in the future. And if you want to live in a world of denial that it won't affect me, then you're just another brick in the wall. You've got to realize that this is going to affect all of us. It's starting, and where it's affecting people now, it's dramatic to them. Well, I think that it should be dramatic to everyone when anyone is experiencing this type of thing, because it's going to get worse before it gets better. And as your distinguished panelist was mentioning, there are problems with storage of the energy. And I bought Tesla stock, not because of the cars, the electric vehicles, but because of the storage batteries that they were producing. Now, they have problems with the batteries. There are all these types of issues that face any type of technological change. But we must persevere and overcome these changes, these difficulties, in order to advance, because this is the direction that we're headed in. And there's a lot of forces that are aligned against it. You know, there's a lot of money that is invested in the old way of doing things that has damaged the planet. So there are a lot of forces, and you must persevere against those forces. And what you find is that the basic physics of it is it's inertia that's holding you back at first. But once you break through the inertia, once an object gets into motion, it stays in motion. So you must get started with dealing with the storage issues. Okay, this battery doesn't work, or this electricity loses too much power before it arrives at its source. Well, back in the 70s, we were talking about appropriate technology, and that's a long time ago. It has to be appropriate where you live. If you live in a place that has no wind, don't build a windmill. If you live in a place that has a lot of wind, maybe wind power is your solution. But one size does not fit all. One solution is not appropriate everywhere. So find what is appropriate in your environment, your locality, and deal with it there. And this has got to be done locally, because as Rob was saying, there are difficulties in transferring the power from one source to a remote location. So if you can do it locally, then you can be more efficient and more effective. So, but this takes everybody to put their oars in the water and pull them in the same direction, because we must take on this challenge. There are a lot of obstacles to overcome, and there's the inertia of not wanting to get involved, of being a brick in the wall, not wanting to do anything different than what you've done. It's been fine for this long, why change? There's that sentiment that you will run up against. Well, keep fighting against that. That's not perseverance, that's complacency. So you cannot be complacent when this is a dire problem that is going to be affecting the planet, the globe. So I say now, ask not what you can do for your planet. I'm sorry, I butchered it. But ask not what the planet can do for you, but what you can do for your planet. Because this is very important that we all get involved in this, because everybody doing a little thing will add up. If you can only do a little, do that, and it will matter. Thanks again, Sharif, for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Professor Donald, how do you want to analyze to this topic?
Well, I think it's useful to get a little bit of background on some of the things that are going on. There's a couple of papers and books by Mark Granovetter, who studied the electric power industry and the evolution of the electric power industry in the United States. Initially, when Edison was doing his thing, he was into the idea of local generation. And that would mean that there are lots of little power plants that provided a city and so on like that. Power plants at that time and up until very, very recently, many of them were coal. And so you could have a plant anywhere you wanted, really, basically. You just brought the coal there and burned it. However, the gas companies that are already in existence had a hub and spoke kind of model, where they needed to have repositories of gas and then bring that gas through pipelines to people's houses. And they basically had enough power and enough money that when they created the electrical grid in the United States, the way that they did it was in the same hub and spoke type of manner, so that the electrical generation facilities could be a long way away from the actual consumer of the electricity. It seems now we're starting to understand, as Rob pointed out, there is loss in the electricity. I want to say at the same time, electric motors are 4 or 5 times as efficient as gas motors. So from the same amount of petroleum energy, if you convert it to electricity and use it that way, electric engines can be 95, 99% efficient, where the most efficient that an internal combustion engine can be is around 20%. So basically 4/5 of the energy in an internal combustion energy just is lost. So that provides a huge motive towards moving towards electricity. And then also there's a lot of good reasons that as Rob pointed out, there is a loss. The long distance power lines lose energy. And so by bringing the energy generation sources closer to the actual user, you wind up having less and less energy loss. The issue of storage is fascinating. I just was lucky enough to come across a couple of books that aren't directly about this, but one of them is called Atlas of AI by a professor at Berkeley and researcher at Microsoft, who's talking about what artificial intelligence actually is. And another one called Weapons of Math Destruction by a former math professor at Columbia and somebody who worked for years in the finance industry in New York, creating these algorithms that rule the world now. And in both cases, they brought something to my attention that I hadn't really considered so much. Mining is the worst job that exists, period. I mean, there's nothing worse. It kills you. It's horrible. You're in this claustrophobic place. There's no, the pay is horrible. Everything about it is horrible. I went once to the hills of Kentucky where the Bill Monroe, the father of bluegrass music, was born. And it was all mining areas that had closed down because they had high sulfur coal that you couldn't use anymore. And it was the poorest place I've ever been. I mean, I've been.
Thank you for walking around picking up trash. For what?
The poorest.
Sorry.
And so, and it's a terrible life. However, so where I'm going with this is in order to make batteries and make the computers that we're using and make all these kinds of things, we need lithium, we need molybdenum, we need uridium, we need all of these things that have to be mined. And it's right now starting to destabilize the world in a lot of ways because one of the main sources for it is in China. It's extremely damaging to the ecology. And I think that when we're looking at the whole energy transition, we have to realize that there's kind of no free lunch. Like switching from the pollution and the damage of petroleum, we're kind of switching to a new kind of damage and a new kind of exploitation of people. So I'm going to leave it there and we can talk about that more later.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. We have our climate activist, Mr. Alex. So, Mr. Alex, how are you? How is your activities going on? And how do you want to analyze today's topic, energy transitions and resource allocation? Yes.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Sorry for the distraction. I try to give credit where credit's due, and there's a random person walking around through the parking lot picking up trash. You know, not in a uniform, doesn't look like they work for the store or anything. So that's one way to help support our transition towards sustainability. When you see someone, you know, picking up trash or doing something good for the environment, to try to congratulate them, talk to them, say hi, acknowledge them. You know, if it's a homeless person randomly picking up trash on the side of the road, which I actually frequently see, I'll try to give them a couple dollars and just thank them, and, you know, and show them that I'm appreciative or we're appreciative of what they're doing. So again, I'm sorry for the distraction. So Donald was just talking about mining, and it's tragic. One of the things that bothers me the most about mining and coal mining is just the issue with the miners' lungs and the long-term damage. And I guess, well, hopefully this video will help raise awareness of that, just like, you know, wearing even a basic mask. I mean, it's just horrible what they're going through. And, you know, of course, there's the slave labor happening in different countries around the world and child labor. It's really horrific. I am appreciative that Elon Musk has taken some steps to try to source some of the materials for the batteries sustainably, and he's tried to address some of these issues. Now, when we think of mining and car batteries, I know there is going to be a large environmental impact and the environmental degradation from the mining, but there is with just about anything that we do. So I kind of look at some of the things that we're doing is like taking one step back to take two steps forward. And I've mentioned that before, but it's a lot better that we're mining for car batteries than mining for all of these other frivolous things that don't serve a purpose, that people just buy, that sits on a shelf or hangs on a wall, or sits somewhere that actually doesn't serve a purpose. So Elon Musk and Tesla, they actually created or invented or established Battery Day. I don't know how many they've had. The last one was, I think, maybe 3 months ago. So that's an annual event where people around the world get together or discuss batteries and battery technology. I know Elon Musk and Tesla, they have a lot of their battery information open source. And through these discussions and other climate or activism related discussions, I constantly hear people talk about batteries not being recyclable. And that's kind of like old information. I'm pretty sure that, well, I know Elon and Tesla, their batteries are now recyclable, and he has that all in place. And all of that information is open source, and we need more, companies and corporations that have, revolutionary ideas, concepts, and things that could help our transition towards sustainability to be open source. So I hope other car manufacturing companies and people producing batteries could reference some of the some of the information Elon Musk has provided, so they can also implement some of those strategies. As far as Elon and Tesla, we're in a really interesting time trying to get to Mars, and we actually have Rob on the show, which that's more of his area of expertise. Now, I have been against us going to Mars, and then sometimes I'm for it. I'm kind of back and forth. Of course, I'm an activist, so I'm like, we got to stay here on Earth, and we need to fix what we have going on here. But there's no stopping it. There's absolutely no stopping it. Like, it's going to continue to increase. We're going to continue to invest money towards space exploration. We're going to continue to send technology and trash up into the atmosphere, and we're going to continue to try to get people to Mars. So I actually just had like this epiphany. So it's like, wait, if all the rich and wealthy people go to Mars, then they're not on Earth. So maybe we can start speeding up our, transition towards sustainability. If all the rich people are then on that planet, all the Republicans, all the wealthy elite, then we can, stay here and maybe expedite our progress. So anyways, I have mixed feelings about Mars, but there has been a lot of technologies and things that we've learned, or that we've, from space exploration, that we now implement in our lives. Like, I think solar panels, the research invested in those was, one of the first solar panels, I think, was on some space exploration, whatever. So we are starting to transition towards wireless electricity. This is something that may be around the corner, so that's really cool. And Donald was mentioning with efficiency with electricity. And if you are watching this video, it's really good to know when you're talking about electricity, just knowing the difference between AC and DC electricity and current, and just how that works. DC is really inefficient. It only runs through electrical wires so far, and AC is a lot more efficient. And there's that documentary a lot of us have seen now. What was that called? The Thomas Edison documentary. I watched it a few years ago. Donald, do you know the documentary? That's a really good one when it comes to.
I don't watch documentaries, so.
Okay, it was about the creation of the light bulb, I think, and electricity, and the AC and DC. Okay.
I've read a number of books about it. I understand the difference very well.
Okay, cool. So I took a course in solar technology, and none of that information's fresh in my mind right now, but it is really good to know the difference between AC and DC. And I also, so solar panels are now, I think last I checked, at 27% efficiency, somewhere 27, 29. So I think like leafs are, and maybe I'll double check, in this broadcast, but I think leafs are like 4% or 5%. I think solar panels are more efficient than leafs. So that's really cool. And I'll go ahead and listen to the conversation, write down some more notes, and try to add something informative at some point.
Thank you, Mr. Alex. Professor Rob, so ball is in your court, because everybody waiting for you, that how you analyzing the technology, different kind of technology, because even there is already question from audience that what are the main challenges in the energy transition for developing nation. Thank you, Nur Fazrin. She is from Malaysia. So even when we discuss with the energy ministries from different country, we find the like implementing different kind of project is really challenging. Like, not Malaysia is a big country, so developing like green energy and solar energy, and this thing is not difficult for them. They are also rich, but other developing nations, they have a lot of challenges. So what are the major challenges? How we can make a realistic energy transition systems in our ecosystem, Professor Rob?
Well, as I mentioned before, one of the goals for this next generation of energy generation and transmission is put the generating sources closer to where the entities that are going to use them. Here in the United States, it's a lot of the reason of why large data centers are placed near places like where I live, where we've got hydroelectric power and energy is relatively cheap. And if you can get it close to the generating source, you get much more of the energy that's being produced by the hydroelectric, in this case, hydroelectric power source. We also have some pretty good sized solar farms going in. But one of the big issues as we transition to these greener energy sources is they're not complete. With wind and solar, part of that solution has to be charging and storage, and the difficulty of wind typically generates from mid-afternoon through early evening. Solar generates from about mid-morning to late afternoon, depending on the angle of the panels. And you can increase yield if you make those panels follow the sun, but that comes with an awful lot of extra costs. And so often, if you looked at solar farms, the cost isn't justified. And we've got a number of different kinds of solar. We've got solar panels, which most people are familiar with. But we also have large-scale mirrored systems, which heat a receiver, and that receiver turns water into steam, and then the steam does the generating. So the water or some other fluid, and the steam does the generating. But those tend to be some of the largest solar plants, and they are set up to follow the sun, so they can maintain high yields throughout the day. But the issue remains: what do you do at night? We've been looking at off-planet generation, but then we get into issues with regard to energy transfer. We can transfer energy wirelessly, but the energy loss is significantly higher than it is when you use wireline. So we're struggling with the other half of some of these sustainable energy sources, which typically require storage or would require placement someplace where they can generate 24/7, because we use energy 24/7. We just don't use it during the day or late afternoon or early evenings, and that's been one of the big problems. Also, it's pretty costly to change from one energy ecosystem to another. If you're going from oil, coal, or gas-fired power plants, and now you're going to put in solar, wind, and geothermal, your placement may be different. Now, geothermal might work where the plant is, but you typically place it someplace where it's relatively inexpensive to drill and get to your heat source. And by pure luck, it might be where a plant is, but chances are it's not. Solar and wind probably won't be where a current generating plant is, and that means all that infrastructure needs to be moved to where the generating plant is, and that carries a great deal of cost. And of course, the other issue for a lot of folks is because this is changing so dramatically right now. I mean, one of the issues we're dealing with is we really stopped developing batteries in the early 1900s because lead acid was good enough for most everything, and we didn't get back into it again until the 90s when we suddenly discovered we wanted laptops and phones with battery life that was quite a bit longer than the technologies that we had. Even alkaline batteries wasn't good for us because we were replacing the damn batteries all the time, which has its own ecological problems. So the difficulty is we've kind of been doing a lot of the easy stuff, which is generating, and been putting off to a degree the hard stuff, which is efficient energy storage. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are a whole ton of companies working on storage right now, and some really interesting work. After we moved from liquid sodium, we moved to using hydroelectric technology for storage, where you pump the water up or down, either using old mine shafts or mountain ranges. You pump the water up during the day, and then you generate power at night. But do remember that does mean you have to increase your solar or wind fields by at least 2x, because part of the power has to go into into storage, and then part of the power has to run whatever you're consuming at the moment. So your requirement, your plant requirement goes up rather dramatically. That's why a lot of us right now are looking at geothermal as probably a better approach, because you don't have that 2x problem. Geothermal can generate 24/7, so you don't have to over generate during the day or generating period, so you have enough storage or energy at night. So there's a lot going on here. If I were in education and looking at this, research would probably be where I would focus right now, because everything else is pretty much fluid. And so if you suddenly were in the midst and got a nice job at a lithium-ion plant, there's a pretty good chance, but by the end of the decade, certainly by the end of 2 decades, we're not going to be using lithium-ion batteries anymore. In fact, we may not be using lithium anymore. It's lithium mining is problematic, as is disposal. So moving to another cleaner storage medium would be incredibly beneficial, and certainly one that's more efficient. And we've kind of maxed out lithium ion at the moment. We've looked at using things like seawater or salt really, but seawater to increase the efficiency of lithium ion. And then we've looked at things like lithium air, but unfortunately that didn't scale. So there's a pretty good chance we're going to get off, much like we got off petrochemicals, we're going to get off the lithium technology with regard to storage and move to something that's quite a bit greener over the next 2 decades. But we don't know what yet. So being on the side that's doing the research, that's trying to make those determinations, is probably going to be more sustainable than picking up any one of these technologies at the moment, except possibly geothermal, which is ramping rather nicely now. And nuclear hasn't gone away. Nuclear is a technology that has been very sustainable. Storage has historically been an issue, but we've been working on that storage problem for decades. If you want to read something a little worrisome with regard to storage, there are some articles up about how Great Britain, how the UK is storing their used nuclear material in large pools of water, where they have to shoot the birds that land in the water for fear that they're going to escape and cause radioactive problems. Being worried about radioactive birds, though, is quite a big improvement over worrying about dying of cancer due to plastic intrusion in food. So that I still favor nuclear over petrochemical, but the fact is we're advancing very well there, and it does remain a viable power source going forward. But if I was going to focus, I'd probably look at geothermal as just the greener, more sustainable, probably more popular way to do things, because so far outside of disaster films, we haven't seen a major problem with geothermal technology, though it could certainly arise. A lot of change, research first, and then pick the technology that seems to be on the upswing. You might want to stay away from any of the technologies that are in decline or worrisome, or maybe work on a way to make it cleaner. Yes.
What do you think about hydrogen as far as future technologies for energy storage?
Fuel cells have kind of come and gone. It's certainly very clean, though you do have to produce the hydrogen, and you have to transport it, and both of those have costs. It hasn't really worked out for automotive, largely due to the cost of putting in refueling stations. Right now, you're mostly able to do it at airports. It just hasn't spread well, but it is another clean source. I think last I saw, I think geothermal, if you're going to do widespread, is quite a bit more efficient. But moving from the fuel sources we have today to a cleaner fuel source. So there is now synthetic gasoline as well, which is substantially cleaner than petrochemical gasoline. That could be implemented far more quickly. For instance, than electric vehicles, because it could use the existing ecosystem. It's fascinating that it wasn't until it was very clear that we were going to collapse the petrochemical system that suddenly we had a big discovery with regard to synthetic gas, given we've had synthetic oils for decades. So that it's kind of a questionable timing with regard to discovery. Maybe it may be coincidental, but I wonder. But in any case, cleaner fuels can provide another way to use energy, but hydrogen's kind of had its ups and downs. They keep trying to scale it, and it just doesn't seem to want to scale.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Besides that, I just want to add, as a consultant, as I have get access in some of the Japanese company, and I saw that Japan actually doing very good research on hydro energy. And what I understand from their technology and other thing, it may be expensive if we compare to the developing nation financial conditions and other things. For
Saying
USA
hydro
and
or hydrogen?
hydrogen, yes, Japan actually doing a lot of research. Yes,
Yeah, well,
hydrogen.
Toyota's CEO got up and said we're all idiots for moving to electric cars. We should be moving to hydrogen. Said he had some decent arguments. We've got some difficulty with car companies that don't really understand the ecosystem that serves them. For instance, Elon Musk has been talking about doing his own mining for lithium, which most of us think is going to be a huge mistake, because what does he know about mining? Though he has jumped in certainly a broad number of industries, and he's done surprisingly well, because what does he know about space? But SpaceX is of the independents has been doing better. Blue Origin's having a bit of a cow at the moment. So you kind of go up and down with that. But if you're gonna argue an alternative fuel source and you're a large manufacturer, you probably are going to need to really look into how that fuel is created, because the existing ecosystem's probably not going to support you by itself. You're going to either have to invest or become expert in removing some of the problems with that ecosystem. And sadly, Toyota hasn't yet done that, though they've done the most with regard to putting cars on the road that, as far as I know, that use hydrogen. That most experience, at least with regard to execution.
Yes. Mr. Jamsid, so what energy sources you prefer, and what do you want to add as an example that we can use for our energy sources?
Well, I would go back to the appropriate technology where you are. I do believe geothermal can be exploited far more efficiently than it has been. But I think that we have to speak about general reluctance to change. That is a human nature. We have a reluctance to change, but we must change. So this is the thing that I want to talk about, because we have problem solvers, we have problem deniers, and we have those that see, if we let the perfect be the enemy of the good, because we see a problem with a potential solution and we give up. This is another thing that you must overcome, these very human frailties. You don't want to get started. That's inertia holding you back. You want to give up when the first time you bump your head into the wall. You just want to say, well, too hard. No, you got to persevere, because this is really more than just a little serious. This is something that we must challenge and face. And don't look at it as a problem, as a difficulty. Look at it as a challenge and be excited about meeting the challenge. And when you change your perspective in that way and you think, well, doggone it, look at what we've done in the past. Look at what we've overcome, all the problems that we have faced and persevered through. We can do this too. So get hopeful. Don't be despondent. This is too much, too big for me. This is something that all of us can pitch in and do a little bit. I can pick up some trash. That helps. That's a contribution. And if everybody was doing a little bit, it would matter. So I think these things are, whatever the particular energy solution is for your local community, that's what you need to explore. And that's what you need to advance in your local community. But you have to start with yourself first. You've got to change your attitude about this, because I have seen people think, well, we know mining produces jobs, and we need jobs to put food on the table. So therefore, we need mining. Well, this is a logical fallacy. Wouldn't you rather go to a solar plant and have a better job and a better life and still feed your family? Of course you would, but you don't know that. You know the mining. So you have to expand your awareness of the possibilities that are out there. They are out there, and some of them are not perfect, but they are good. And if they are good enough, then we must embrace them. And it depends where you live, what resources are around you, what you can and cannot exploit. Because maybe the shipping costs are too great to exploit this one particular technology. So maybe there's another one that's locally available. So these problems are very complicated to solve, but a lot of really brilliant minds are working on solving them. And I want to, just say, go back to going to Mars. There are a couple of past presidents that I wish we could have sent to Mars, because they have set us back, and they have done a great amount of damage in this, because it's part of getting elected if you appeal to what people know, and that keeps you nailed to the past. We must be looking forward. not behind to what we have done, what we're familiar with, but into the unfamiliar, what might be a little bit scary. These are the things that get people elected. So you've got to change yourself. So you will vote for the people that are going to solve these problems, because they are the ones who will pass the policies that make it happen. Because these are things, even if you do the research and find the right technology, if the political will is not there to implement the change, then it's going to be all for nothing. So we have to be voting for people who are looking forward to the future, to appropriate technology where they are. And these are complicated problems, so there are no easy, simple answers, but they are out there. Good minds are working on them. The solutions will present themselves, and we must be open to them. And we must have the political will to carry them out. And it also is going to be a challenge to the globe. We have to have countries agree on this. So thank goodness we're back in the Paris Accords, because this is not going to take one country doing it. This is going to take the globe doing it. Thanks again, Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Donald. I want to take a question for you. Anika Shams, what are the methods that are used to obtain energy resources?
Well, we've been kind of talking about it. So one of the main ones we use is petroleum-based fuel. There's been a tendency in the United States, coal is a huge major source of it. There's been a tendency in the United States to switch to natural gas because of new technology that allows us to capture the natural gas, and we have lots of it. But in all of those, they're different, and it's it's somewhat less polluting than a lot less polluting than coal for a couple of reasons. And then, as Rob was talking about, there's geothermal, and I'd be curious about how that could be localized. I don't completely understand that, because I do know that there's, Hawaii has had fabulous luck at switching to geothermal, because they're basically a volcano, and they can just kind of, go out in their backyard and shovel a few feet down and hit hot lava. So that makes it, I'm exaggerating, but that makes it easier for them than it would for somebody in Kansas or something, where it's a long way down before you get to something hot. Anyway, that's just a question. But what I'd like to say, a couple of the questions have had to do with how could Bangladesh and other countries make these transitions. And I think that we're talking from a perspective of how do you go from, like, basically often no energy at all to an energy infrastructure that's as sophisticated as the one in the United States, or the developed world, anywhere, China, parts of China, Europe, so on, like that. But I was working with some groups of people that were trying to help educate Syrian refugee children, and they were basically homeless and living in refugee camps, which actually many of them didn't have power at all. So one of the interesting things is, for somebody to get educated, they have to have some sort of a way when they go home at night to read and to study. But if you don't have power, you can't do that. And so what people were doing, there was an organization that became part of the Rotary Club that was selling or acquiring and giving away very, very inexpensive solar powered lights. They were just basically a battery, a solar collector, and a light. So they could run during the day, they could charge the battery, and then at night they could use the light to study. And I think part of what we need to do, or it's useful to do, is to look at specific problems and try and figure out how to solve those problems, instead of trying to recreate the entire infrastructure like we have in the United States, or in the developed world. So I want to mention one other thing is that as part of the transition, people tend to do an all or none thing and make it black and white. And so oftentimes when you talk to people that are very strong proponents of using fossil fuel, they'll say, well, you know, wind doesn't run all the time and you can only use solar power during the day. But if you think about it, every reduction in our use of petroleum is kind of basically a good thing. And a lot of the power when plants are running and people are using a lot of air conditioning and things like that, huge power uses during the day. And so if we dial back our use of petroleum over time, switching it from coal to natural gas, which is less impactful, and then finding ways that during the time that we can use wind and solar to offset that or replace it, let's just say we reduce it by 50%. That's an incredible goal. So what I'm saying is that there's big problems and there's little problems, and new energy sources like solar especially can be something that's incredibly useful. There's people who have businesses in Africa where they get a solar, basically a battery and a solar collector, and they charge people's phones. People pay them and, you know, a few cents, and they charge their phones for them. So there's a lot of opportunity or a lot of things that can be done on a smaller scale that we can do right now that'll make a huge difference. And I would think that actually I want to say one other thing. The power grid in the United States is not very good. It's very, very susceptible to extremely bad problems. So here in California, we get most of our power, or a huge bunch of our power, from hydroelectric in Washington and Oregon, where there's lots and lots of big giant rivers. And that runs direct current lines, surprisingly, the super high speed, super high powered lines that run through the Central Valley down to the south. Somebody could blow one of those up, and a lot of California would be without power until they fixed it. Or, you know, I mean, a radioactive bird could land on it and melt it or something. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can happen. But if a person was a policy person and trying to understand how they could look at a country like Bangladesh that's developing, that they need to really look at what they can do to decentralize the system and make it be, you know, start just like with cell phones, leapfrog what we're doing in the United States. I can talk about the grid more later, but I'm done for now. And thank you. And I'll let other people talk.
Thank you. Mr. Alex, there is a question from our audience. Ale Ahmed, do you think it is feasible to have 100% renewable energy based electricity system in Bangladesh in future?
Yes, I'll go ahead and answer that question. So when we look at that question, a lot of times they base it off regions, but more specifically countries. I always hear, you know, percentages, you know, based off like California is going to be at 75%, or we're going to try, you know, this country is trying to get to this percentage. I think there's one country that's now at net zero. I also think Costa Rica is really close. So they usually base it off a percentage. I think that there's a lot of factors in play when it comes to becoming 100% sustainable, or getting your electricity from, you know, sustainable sources. So again, like James was mentioning, it kind of depends on what they have and what they're working with in that area. So I'm not from Bangladesh. I've never been to Bangladesh. I've been to Nepal, is probably the closest. So it depends on like how much land area, how much money, how much finances, how much solar. And as what was also mentioned in this discussion, it comes down to political will. I mean, a lot of times they have the money and we have the technology. It comes down to like, who we vote into office that makes the decisions for all of us. There are ways to help expedite that when it comes to voting, just getting involved with, with the political system, going to city council meetings, doing petitions, just raising awareness of this issue. So so it comes down to it also comes down to, is it going to be is electrical energy going to be derived from solar? Is it going to come from wind, geothermal? Because some of these are a lot more efficient, some of these are a lot cheaper, some of them work a lot better in specific areas. So then once you decide on what source you're going to go with, and then once there's the finances and the political will and that gets established, it also comes down to the individual person to conserve electricity. And right now, just like how people are buying and owning things they don't need and wasting resources and wasting food, we're wasting a lot of electricity. I mean, there's so much information on the internet how to conserve electricity. So I actually generate a lot of my own electricity with my own solar panel. I put it on the roof of my vehicle, and this is actually my electrical storage right here. So this is a power pack. So in this is actually the batteries in here, the control module, and the DC to AC converter. I can charge my cell phone, and right now I'm running my laptop off this unit. So I've taken this type of thing with me to different disaster areas. So that's my way of contributing, voting with my money, and putting more money into the solar industry with the companies producing things like this. But at the same time, not using electricity at home as often. So that's taking off some of the strain from the overall electrical grid. So there's different ways that we can conserve electricity. I mean, having our own solar systems is one way. Another way is just, shutting off lights. One of the common things that I see that like hardly anyone knows, and it's a huge problem because we all have cell phones and we all have tablets, and those little boxes that you plug your cell phone in, or whenever these are plugged into the wall, this is consuming electricity. It's called phantom watts. So when everyone has their laptops plugged in and they're not using their laptop, and then they have those little black or white boxes plugged into the wall and power strips and TVs, you add up millions or billions of those. It's just unnecessary electricity that we're wasting. So when it comes to a country being sustainable, it's not just installing a good solar system or 100 wind turbines. It comes down to us all conserving electricity. It's just really important, and just taking the individual initiative to be more conscious. So Bangladesh has a lot of things to worry about, not just becoming sustainable, but the rise in ocean sea level is, I think, possibly even a more pressing issue for Bangladesh than trying to become sustainable at this time. So I think the government needs to spend a lot of their time and resources towards that crisis, unfortunately, than other stuff. So I wrote a note down earlier. This is really cool. So Elon Musk, one of the richest people in the world, believes in climate change. He's working to address climate change. And I mean, that's really cool. Can you imagine if like the richest person was like Trump, that just said it didn't exist, or he didn't care about it and he's not going to do anything about it? Or Jeff Bezos, or whatever his name is, Bezos, that just doesn't really care. I mean, we have Elon Musk that on Battery Day, at the very beginning of his speech, within the first sentence or two, he mentioned climate change and how we got to address climate change. Now, regardless if Elon Musk is trying to address climate change because he really thinks that we can solve it and he's going to potentially save, billions of lives, or if he just thinks that if we all address climate change, it's going to buy him more time for his space exploration, so the wealthy elite can transition to Mars. Regardless if it's to buy us more time or solve the crisis, I'm just thankful he's doing anything about it, and that's incredible. And we are working towards solutions a lot faster with his help, with his support, and even with his voice. So I did write a note because sometimes when we're talking about electricity, this gets brought up, and I see questions like this on my Facebook forums and Facebook groups. Well, why aren't we putting the electrical lines underground? Because Donald just mentioned, disasters, there's forest fires, higher wind association with climate change, and there's going to be a lot more superstorms and disasters that cause downed power lines. So it's really expensive to put electrical lines underground. It's just really costly. So you got to there's more like laws and permitting and red tape and, digging and watching out for, other, lines and electrical and plumbing and everything. But the main thing is whenever there's a problem, because I've read some research where they, did, the reviews and the pros and cons and cost comparison. So one of the main thing is whenever there's damage, it's just really difficult to dig up the ground to find where that damage is to fix it. So that's not going to be something in the future. We're going to continue to see electrical lines, above ground. They did studies, and it's not cost effective, and it's just really expensive. There are some really rich neighborhoods around the world, I think possibly Miami or somewhere in LA, where they have put the lines underground because it's just the price per capita or whatever that is. What is that? Can't say it. Annual in homeowners income or whatever so high in that area, their tax bracket or whatever, that they put the power lines underground. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation. And we did talk about water storage for electricity. Last thing, so there's this new thing they're trying to do where they're trying to put these train tracks on a hill. And I watched some simulations and some videos. They were like really high budget simulations. So it seems like they're working towards those ideas and that concept. But they were train tracks from the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill. And they had like train cars that had electrical engines and batteries. And then they had alternators in it. So they would pick up these huge there were like concrete slabs, and sometimes they could take one or they could take five, and they would take the concrete slabs up to the top of the hill. They would drop them off, and then when the trains would come down with the electrical slabs later on, in the evening when there's no solar generation, that weight of those slabs in the train cars coming down the hill would then redirect all that electrical energy into the alternator and recharge the batteries, and then it would go back into the system once it reached the bottom. So that was just another type of energy storage that might not be as efficient. We might not see it in the future, just something else they were working on. That's what I'd like to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alex. Professor Rob, there is another question from Nepal. I think you can give them some solutions. Sitaram, thank you, Mr. Sitaram, for your question. Right now, most of the developing countries like Nepal, we are facing energy crisis. How can we solve this problem? But as per I know, Bangladesh do not have energy problem. They have transmission problem. They need to develop the new transmission line because they have enough energy and energy sources in their country, inside their countries, because of many mega projects already they launch inside their country. But specifically from Nepal, so how can we solve this problem, like this energy problem, Professor Rob?
Well, one of the problems I observe whenever I get a question like this is the first step to solving a problem like this is actually analyzing the nature of the problem. As you pointed out, Bangladesh's problem isn't so much energy source, it's energy transmission. That a lot of people don't have power in Bangladesh right now, and there's no infrastructure in place to provide them with power. That does provide an opportunity to jump to the next generation of technology and go to localized energy generation. I did post a link on MiniGeo, which is a firm that's come up with a very small energy plants that use geothermal to generate power and can be located in remote areas. And while it isn't as efficient as grid tied, if you don't have the infrastructure for grid tied, you don't have a lot of choice. And it is more efficient That's the underpowered lines one. It was an earlier link, but if you don't have it in place and you have to build out all the infrastructure, why not just jump to that next technology? Don't bother with infrastructure and do it that way. Alex pointed out the difficulty since you have the link up with regard to buried versus non-buried power lines. The advantages to the buried power lines in certain areas may exceed the disadvantages. For instance, we certainly saw in areas experiencing large weather shifts, above ground power is incredibly unreliable. The everything from the generator to the transformers are exposed, and the lines can blow down, break, be hit by trees, and then you're out, for a long period of time, and there is an economic impact to being out for long periods of time. The people can't get to work. They can't refrigerate their food. Often they can't even, depending on how the water pumps are running, they may lose water. We certainly saw in Texas when they lost their grid, they pretty much lost everything. Even natural gas distribution went down when they lost power. And so you start with an analysis of the problem, and then you pick the path that's going to give you your most sustainable result. And by sustainable here, I don't necessarily mean greener. By sustainable, I mean give you the result that you're going to be able to sustain for a long period of time. You don't want to, for instance, suddenly to start dropping in oil-fired plants, because you're pretty sure those things are going to go away pretty soon. So you want to pick something that's likely going to provide a return to justify its expense. I remember here on the West Coast of the United States, they put in when I was young, they put in a nuclear power plant, and I remember having an argument with my grandfather who had run a petrochemical company about the placement of that nuclear power plant, arguing that it's pretty clear to me that it wasn't going to last. One, it was on a pretty big earthquake fault, and the other is nobody around it wanted the plant there, and that was one. And I think I was 8 or 9 at the time.
And they shut it down, right? It's not there anymore, right?
Yeah, but my grandfather at the time told me, well, don't worry my pretty little head about that stuff. It was above my pay grade. But they ended up taking it out, and so they spent billions of dollars putting in this plant, and then hundreds of millions of dollars taking the plant out again. And so you had all that investment going no place. It just completely wasted because they didn't really think through the problem. Of course, one of the things they hadn't thought of when the plant went up was a catastrophic meltdown, and then the movies talking about the China syndrome. The movie was what really turned the local population against the plant. But it was on a fault, and so putting a power plant near a potential area of problems, much like we saw with the Japanese power plants that failed during the tsunami. That's not going to end well, and so you've got to think through all of that. You've got to think through the long-term consequences of the technology. You've got to pick a technology that uniquely fits your needs and requirements. What works in Norway, I think that went net zero a while back, is probably not going to work in Bangladesh because the environment is just very different, and your access to certain power sources and resources are going to be very different. You might use the same thing and you might use them as an example, but chances are you won't because you're just so different. And so answering a question like you just asked requires a substantial amount of analysis up front to make sure that the horse you're picking to ride is one that will take you to your destination. Otherwise, you're going to experience what California experienced, a whole lot of cost with not a lot of benefit. And that's kind of necessary here.
Thank you, Mr. Jamsit. So what's your advice, or what is your guideline or observation from today's discussion?
Well, I really believe that if the problem is accurately stated, it's half solved, and we've lost a lot of opportunities by not identifying the true problems. And so I think that we start there, saying what is the real problem. Right now it's global climate change, and it's having an effect of global warming, and that is disrupting the natural weather cycles, and that is causing floods, hurricanes, and all sorts of disasters that are becoming evident. It's very hard to deny that it's happening. you will have these deniers, and I won't bother with them because they're probably not watching this show. So the idea that I think we have to stress that we haven't really touched on here is any system that you build in must have redundancies. In other words, you have to have backups. You have to be able to restore power. You know, when the pandemic hit, you know, I was okay because, you know, I can still go remotely to meetings via Zoom or StreamYard or some sort of broadcast ability. And then we had a power outage, and all of a sudden, all the meetings I had scheduled, I couldn't go to. So, you know, I just realized I had just taken that for granted. And, you know, we can't take it for granted. We must have backups. So when my computer went down, which it just did on this show, you know, I could restore it to the status that it had beforehand. But we also have to have redundancies. This is what Texas failed to do. So it had one bet on one power grid, and when that power grid failed, they had no backup system. They had no redundancy in place. So this is, you have to be interconnected as well. So, you know, I preach local solutions because you start with yourself, then your community, and then go from there. But the interconnectedness can help with solve a lot of local problems too. So that, and by interconnectedness, I mean connected to a redundant system, to a system that you can tap into. When I was working for a brokerage firm, we had a host fallback. So when the system that we used to conduct trading failed, we would fall back to this other system, which was less efficient, not as good, but worked. Yeah, it worked well enough until we could restore our primary system. So these are things you also must think about, but you have to think about what is appropriate in my locality. Yeah, if geothermal makes sense here and not here, but there aren't too many wind turbines in Northern California, but there's a huge wind turbine facilities in Southern California where it makes more sense to build them, to use them, to exploit them. There are those in Northern California where they make sense. And this is how we have to do it. What's the problem? The problem is how do we supply power? So how do we do that? What's the solution? And if the first solution is got a flaw, don't give up. Look for another solution that might work. And this perseverance through these problems is the key. But I have to fall back, lastly, my last point is the political will to make this happen. We can't have a bullet train in California where it makes perfect sense to do it because we have to have multiple municipalities buy into it. And they won't. So we don't have the political will to do it. You see these trains all over the world, but we can't do it in California. And because we can't agree. So at some point, we can't have the political, yes, people over here automatically triggering the no votes over here. We have to learn to be able to cooperate. We have to learn to work together. And this is the fundamental thing. We must have the political will, which requires cooperation. So we must get after beyond the thinking that if you win, I lose, because we're all in it together and we all lose together or we all win together. We have to change our way of thinking. We have to change ourselves first. So that's the message that I want to close on, because the individual solutions in individual localities will differ. There is not one size fits all, but we just have to be open to potential solutions where we live. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Donalds, how do you want to add your analysis for today's topic and any different solution you have in your hand?
Well, I'd like to say a couple different things. One of those wealthy communities that requires underground power lines is Santa Cruz. And my house has underground power lines because they've been required for houses since the 70s. And the stuff that was there before has just stayed, but any new stuff has to be underground, has for, what is this, 70s? That's what, 40 years.
Your house or your neighborhood outside?
the neighborhood. I mean,
Really cool.
it has to be. Palo Alto's completely that way. I mean, all over it's been.
Good chunk of San Jose the same way.
Yeah.
And here where I live, all new stuff's underground.
Yeah, there's some that are older, so there's some poles around, but there's not to our house or the houses, any of the newer houses in the neighborhood. There's some that are grandfathered in, but
Santa Cruz is one of the most expensive places to live in the United States or in the world, correct? I mean, it's up there.
No,
or in the top
it's not.
10
It's not.
places,
It's one. It's one of the least affordable places, because what that means is that the housing costs are completely disproportionate to the type of jobs and income people have around here. They work at restaurants and stuff, and they're competing with Silicon Valley for Silicon Valley prices. But people in Silicon Valley come here because it's cheap. But it's nothing like Palo Alto here. But regardless, if you look at the situation in Nepal, I think we're not having a lot of perspective, because in Nepal, they are running into difficulties because, as the speaker mentioned earlier, who came briefly, the problem, they heat their houses and their energy sources for them is wood. And that's how they light their houses. That's how they heat their houses. That's their energy source. And there isn't enough wood. So part of their energy crisis is that they're chopping down their forests to heat their houses. And I think that's a pretty different issue than switching from just from centralized petroleum or fossil fuel based products. So what's important about that is to think about, and it's a lot what Rob said about being able to analyze what the problem is. I want to go back to what I said about just being able to have light at night in your house. This is something that we're talking about. There's organizations that'll help you, and the cost of one of these things is like $5. And I mean, $5 is a lot of money for somebody that's living on $1 a day or less in Nepal. But there are organizations right now that are dedicated to trying to get these kinds of things to people. So you can't go from 0 to 100, even in your Tesla, in that amount of time, in an instant. I want to also mention one other thing that's just worth knowing about, and I don't know in a way almost how it applies, but the United States' power grid is pretty ancient. And over the last 20 years or so, I've followed it pretty closely. And as I said, the guy whose book I mentioned, Mark Rana, is a good friend of mine. And one of the things, as solar started to become available, it was the power system was designed as a one-way street. So centralized power systems take the power from some central place and they bring it to your house and you have it. So when people started putting solar on their house, this is something a lot of people didn't know, you would get a discount on your rate, but it wasn't that you were actually putting solar power back on the grid. What they did is they did a formula of how much less power that you were using, and then they would give you a rebate for using less power. So you weren't really, your solar power wasn't really providing power to anybody else. And part of the reason for that is the way transformers work. So the electrical lines are 12,000 volts that go between cities, and then they're stepped down to, I forget right now, but something like 12, some number of thousands, low thousands of volts. And then if you look at places where the lines are above ground, you see these things on them that look sort of like scuba tanks. And these are transformers, and they take that power and they drop it down to 240, which then is split into 120 at your house. And then but they're one way. The way they work is that they're two coils of wire. One of them's bigger than the other. When the power goes from one coil to another, it changes the voltage of it. They're one way. And so ultimately, a lot of these had to start being replaced. Now, ideally, if you could imagine the perfect electrical grid, what you'd want to have is, say, everything's interconnected, and you have a sunny day in Santa Barbara, and that solar power would come to Santa Cruz, who's foggy that day, and vice versa, that there was some way of intelligently distributing the power across the whole system. And we're getting there, but it goes back to the kind of thing that we're talking about, almost everybody's mentioned so far. In where I live in Santa Cruz, there's a lot of people who are not very scientifically literate, and the kind of anti-government and super anti-corporation. So anything about a corporation whatsoever, they're always bad. They never do anything good. They're just horrible. And so what happened was when PG&E wanted to put smart meters on people's house, they went ballistic. They said, oh my God, the power company's going to be spying on me. They're going to know what kind of power I'm using and blah, blah, blah. And so that's greatly slows the ability to take the power from the house and put it back into the grid in a way, because ultimately the system kind of has to know where the power is so that it can distribute it to other places. And slowly but surely, we're replacing everything with two-way transformers that have intelligence in them. I'll say that even now, the way that they distribute the power in the state of California is they have these big boards, and they look at them, and they light up, and you can see where they need more power or less power. And these guys have these knobs, and they turn the knobs to distribute the power. It's very primitive right now. So, going from not even having enough power to read a book at night to the kind of thing that I'm talking about, these intelligent distribution systems, it's not a single step. But my belief and advice would be, look into solutions that solve your immediate problems. How are you going to heat your house? How are you going to get light? How are you going to solve the things that you need to do yourself, and try and do it independently? So solar, things like that, give you a measure of independence. And I would highly recommend that because it's been working in a lot of places in the world. And that's what I have.
Thank you, Mr. Alex. Mr. Alex.
Yes, thank you. So I did some research right here, and now throughout school they say don't ever reference Wikipedia. So for those of you who don't know, Wikipedia is something that people around the world could add information and change information. But for this information, I am just going to say on Wikipedia, it says that a plant leaf is typically 1 to 2% efficient. And, it also says like 5.4% net leaf efficiency or whatever. So again, I thought like 4. So yeah, plant efficiency or leaves, it probably depends on the leaf, is really inefficient compared to our solar technology, which is just really cool that we have technology that great that we can create electrical energy from something more efficient than a tree leaf or a plant leaf. Okay, so the other thing that I couldn't reference or didn't remember earlier in this discussion, at the beginning of this discussion, when I was talking with Donald. So there's so much information, and I get my information from a wide range of sources. And yeah, I occasionally watch a documentary. 5-6 years ago, I was caught up on all the Netflix documentaries, every environmental documentary Netflix had produced at that time. Right now, I'm not caught up on documentaries, but there was a documentary recently. It was really popular. I heard about it. It was in the theaters here in Santa Cruz before the pandemic. It's called The Current War, like the current, like electrical current. And that has to do with, what was it? Is it Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla and the war between AC and DC? So if you like movies, if you like documentaries, The Current War, I thought was very educational. So throughout, elementary school, middle school, high school, college. You hear about, AC/DC taking the course in solar technology. You hear about these actors, and then watching the documentary, it kind of brought everything together that I've learned. I thought it was really well put together. So that was that. Now, now I want to correct some things in this discussion as nicely as possible. So we do these discussions to help educate people around the world about what we know, and we learn from each other. We're intelligent people. We have these intelligent conversations. I love these conversations. And every once in a while, we say things that we don't disagree, or we disagree with other people. So I'm going to disagree with Donald. So right here in USA Today, this was in 2019. There was a Wall Street review of median household income data from the U.S. Census Bureau, and they referenced or looked at data from 381 different cities in the United States. There was the 25 of the richest cities, and Santa Cruz was 13. So Santa Cruz was 13th. So it's kind of like, we have it really good here. We have it so good we don't even realize. So they buried the cables underground because Santa Cruz is like the 13th richest city in the United States. That's crazy. So even maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe it was like the 20th, but it's still, there's money here. It's in California. I mean, they're not burying electrical wires in New Orleans. I mean, it's pretty good. So all the other places that buried electrical lines probably had more money than like Oklahoma, New Orleans, Mississippi, and some of the poor states. So I'm right here looking at this information. So again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they could afford to bury electrical lines in cities that are that don't have a lot of money. So again, please correct me if I'm wrong. I just read that it's an expensive process to do. It's a lot of maintenance, a lot of upkeep. I heard they did it in some of the richer neighborhoods in Miami, but I'm not up to date on that information. So no hard feelings, Donald. Feel free to correct any of that information. So, and Rob as well. So I think it's really expensive. I don't think we're going to be burying electrical lines in the future unless there's a specific reason in a specific area. And unfortunately, we are going to see more disasters. So I've covered, over 40 forest fires. I've been through 7 hurricanes, the aftermath of 5 hurricanes, major superstorms. I've seen a lot of down wires. I mean, I'm a journalist. I've covered so many disasters, and it's a huge problem. I've been right out there doing disaster relief right next to PG&E, and they work really, really hard to fix the lines that are down, and they also do the best they can to make sure trees are away from the lines. And I hope in the future, we've discussed it in this discussion, is just creating electricity, where you're at, like substations, or just having home solar systems and cutting away, removing the red tape that's stopping people from putting solar on their house and being off grid. Like even Florida has laws where you can't be off grid. You can't have a solar panel system, and you have to be tied to the grid. And it's probably just the greed of the government wanting to collect taxes on people or know where they're at, and government oversight. So that's something that we have to work on. So I now apologize to James. I apologize, James. So I'm just going to correct James on something. So there are a lot of wind turbines in Northern California. You might not have known this because it's new. They're popping up everywhere. But when I was driving, because I was going to say this even before James spoke, but I was going to talk with Rob, driving through to like Sacramento area. It's somewhere in this, where that old nuclear power plant is. It's somewhere by Mount Diablo. And what's that?
It's called Altamont Pass.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's you can see the nuclear reactor like off to the left. Have you seen it, Donald? That old reactor? That it's somewhere along that pass. It's like a couple hundred yards off the main road. It's interesting because it's all abandoned, and it says no trespassing and stuff like that. So anyways, Rob was talking about how they tried to build that there and it didn't work, and they wasted a lot of money. But interestingly, along that route, there's huge wind turbines everywhere. I didn't see any solar, but that whole area in that region, there's a lot of wind turbines, like huge ones, the big ones, like everywhere. And I was just amazed last time I drove through there, probably a year ago. It's pretty impressive. And then there's some other routes to get towards Sacramento that's not on that route, where you pass the nuclear power plant, the old one. And there's also wind turbines everywhere. So that area technically is Northern California. So as far as like above Sacramento area, I'm not sure if there's any wind turbines going on in that area. And even though technically it's considered Northern California, it's basically Central California area. But yeah, there's a lot of wind turbines there, and it's just cool that we're transitioning that fast. And it's I love seeing wind turbines. Sorry,
Mhm.
it's pretty cool
Mhm.
technology, and that's all.
Thank you for a nice discussions and contribution for today's discussion, because this is very important. We are discussing about energy resources, not only the developed nation, even the strategy for the developing nations. This is very, very important. So I request all of our observers, those who observe our show, and after the show, when we share our session with different university, corporation, and government, share our content as much as possible. Share with your classroom, share with your policymaker, with your corporation. This is our request, and I'm sure our panelists, they are very expert with their opinions. So anything you need support for your consultancy, for your organizational mentorships, or any kind of research, World Talent Economy Forums actually trying to give you support, and our panelists definitely they will support different initiative from different countries from Asia Pacific. Beside that, we are actually
Out of time, and it's going to be the concluding remark. So we would like to start with you, James. Go ahead and please give us a concluding remark.
Thank you, Alex. I will conclude with just this one sentiment, which is start with yourself. Now, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There is expertise that is out there that is appropriate to your locality, to your community. Find those experts. Connect with those experts. So you start with yourself, but then you connect to your community. Somebody knows the answer for what's the appropriate technology to use where you are. You don't have to discover it yourself. Somebody already knows it. Find out who they are, connect to them, and then connect others to them. Or just you yourself, lead the change that needs to take place in your community. You don't have to discover it. Somebody else already has. So find what's appropriate and then get involved in making a change. There will be inertia that you have to overcome. That's just the law of physics. You have to get started, and it's harder to get started than it is to keep moving once you're in movement. And once you get people in movement, then it will take on a power of its own self. So you think you can't change anything yourself, but yes, you can. But you do it together. You do it as a community. And then you see what is appropriate for you in your locality. And then you get other people to buy into it. And you affect, if there's political obstacles, you affect political change. You do whatever you have to do to make the change, to make the technology that's appropriate for you, your area, your community, your locality, to make that happen. And if you say, well, all we have is forests and trees, well, find somebody who can tap into something else. Because maybe just burning wood is not the only solution. Find someone who has the answer and then use that, because the answers are out there. Somebody has already discovered them. You just need to find the appropriate technology for where you are. Now, there are places that lack resources, and they may not be habitable in the future. And there may be relocation of communities that is in our future, and that may be inevitable. But maybe not where you are. Find out what's appropriate where you are. Get the people who have already done the research, already have the knowledge, involve them, involve people who don't have the knowledge, but once you give them the knowledge, they're willing to act on it. And so this is how you as an individual can make a difference wherever you are, whatever country you're in, whatever language you speak. So this is my final contribution, if it is one, to this panel discussion. But Sharif, I want to thank you for involving me. Always learn something. I've learned something today, but it's not the first time. Thank you.
Did he freeze again? Sharif? Okay, Donald, would you like to give your concluding remark?
Yes, we can continue this because I looked at the 25 most. I can't find the 25 lists that's got Santa Cruz on it.
Oh,
I
I just
looked at
sent
the
it to
median.
Sharif. Yeah, I'll send it.
Good. I looked. Often those lists are, I don't know. You have to look at how they derived them. But the median income in Santa Cruz is only $4,000 a year more than average median income in the median income of the United States in general. And so I don't really see how it could be one of the richest cities. There's no industry. There's nothing here. There's
Maybe
no
based
good
off property
restaurants.
value.
There's nothing here. Well, property value isn't. Is it? I don't know. I don't.
It's not liquid.
Maybe, yeah. It's not liquid, right? Yeah, you can't do anything with it. It's dead money. In fact, Santa Cruz. I lived here for a long time, and what we call the wealthy people in Santa Cruz, their money is dead money. They've got money invested. They're rich on paper from real estate, but they don't invest in businesses. They don't pay their employees. It's they just own property that's valuable. Anyway, but that's a whole. I'm not real fond of Santa Cruz, but
I just sent you the link. But even if it was the 40th richest city, it's still a lot richer than other countries around the world. So they can't bury electrical lines because if we're looking at a larger scale, it's just not.
Yeah, right. I don't think that, as we've all talked about, centralized generation is probably not a good way to go. And as I mentioned, and I want to say again, is that if you can be someplace where you can transfer your energy use to something like solar, it's not just a matter of solar panels generating electricity. There's solar ovens that basically are big magnifying glasses that heat things up, and you can cook with those. And if you're in a position where in order to get power, you have to go out and gather wood and burn wood in your house, that's unhealthy. It's bad for your lungs. It's bad for the thing. And wood's can be a finite resource if it isn't managed correctly. So the idea of going from where you are, where somebody is, where they're burning wood for their food and heat, to a place where they've got an intelligent, centralized grid that knows where every single watt in the entire system is and move them around, that isn't going to happen. So I think that for people most of the people in situations in the world, looking into alternatives, we call it alternative energy. So what are the alternatives that you have? And look at your own situation, or the situation of those around you. It's a fantastic thing for entrepreneurs because there's an incredible amount of businesses. And as I said, people have businesses where they buy a solar panel and they make a living charging people's cell phones. Everything like that. There's opportunities that are available to you. And I would think that would be the best course of action for most people right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Alex.
Yes. So Donald did mention the smart meters earlier, and smart meters are in between where the electrical lines enter the house. It's what regulates or shows the power companies how much electricity is being consumed by the homeowner or the renter. And before, it used to be that dial that spins. And I think there were a lot of people that were maliciously going in and changing stuff and stealing electricity. And it wasn't as not just efficient, but effective. So they ended up changing it out to the smart meters. And there was a lot of pushback in our community of Santa Cruz. A lot of activists fought those smart meters for a long time, saying like kind of similar to 5G nowadays, saying that it causes cancer and it does all these horrible things. Now, that's not my area of expertise, so I don't know all the bad things they could be doing, but I do know they are a lot more efficient. So when you have a smart meter on 50,000 homes in a region, or 100,000, or all California, it just makes it conserves a little bit of energy in all of those. Or Donald mentioned something about taking the energy back, or knowing how much energy to send. It's just more efficient. It's like an upgrade for our system. So there's some things that maybe we should be against as activists, and other things that we should just go along with. Just because it's new doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. We just have to adapt, because it's going to help us in the long run. It's going to help us become more sustainable, our grid to be more efficient, or us just to transition towards lowering our carbon footprint. So there are a lot of smart meters now on the home, so hopefully it is saving on energy and electricity. And I know that they gave PG&E gave customers the option to opt out of the smart meter. I believe it was $5 a month that they would pay extra to PG&E just to have the old meter for whatever reason. I appreciate that Donald just mentioned a solar oven. Just last night and yesterday, a couple times throughout the day, I was searching different types of solar ovens and different models. They range from about $100 to $300 on average. I wanted to take it with me, camping, backpacking, even have it at home, just so I don't have to use the oven as much. You can cook little amounts of bread, cook food in it, just really cool. So solar ovens are now available to the general public. I remember taking some, environmental science courses at Cabrillo, about 8-10 years ago. And we were talking about solar ovens, how you take foil and you fold it, and, anything reflective and mirrors. And now you can just get online and you can buy a solar oven. So that's really cool that they're becoming more available to the general public. And when more people like Donald talk about it, and now I just mentioned it. So solar ovens, please check them out. Buy one, use less electricity, and try to use less natural gas. So along those lines, rocket stoves are really, really important. Now, I don't know if anyone's watching this video that this would apply to, but there are a lot of people in developing countries around the world, and throughout, specifically throughout Africa, that are burning the wood that they have just to cook food. And then when they don't have wood, they're resorting to burning plastic, and that they're breathing that, and it's going into their lungs, it's going into the atmosphere. It's bad altogether. So rocket stoves, I don't have the statistics. I'd like to say, I'm thinking like 10% more efficient. They're really cool. It's like a little jet engine, and if you do it right. So please get online, YouTube search rocket stoves, look at some of the really cool designs that you can make by stacking some cans up on top of each other, or you can just build yourself and share that information, because it's really important. So when I donate to offset my carbon impact of flights, because you can type in Google, carbon offset, and Delta has one, and different airlines and different organizations. So it says, some of the options are planting more trees, educate women, birth control or safe sex or whatever, women education. And then the third category that I've seen on some of these carbon offsets is like educating people about like rocket stoves or something. So something that is a big category. There's some documentaries on it. I've seen some YouTube. So it's another huge thing that we have to work on that would help a lot of people lower their individual carbon footprint and burning wood. And the last thing is Rob mentioned about something about Bangladesh and everything, and he said what to do. So yes, I think education is really important. There's a lot of career opportunities, and again, like he said, there's a huge problem, and then finding solutions. So just working towards solutions and balancing your time and managing your time. I could have said that better, but all right. Well, thank you, Sharif, for another great show. Thank you for everyone that joined this discussion. Appreciate all of you, and I look forward to having another discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Rob.
Okay, so as I think I want to bring up a point. Whenever you're listening to any group of people, develop a skill called critical thinking, and that means when somebody makes a claim, take the time and because you've got it. I mean, especially when we're all studying at home or working from home right now, you've got the chance to look up whatever the person said and validate or invalidate it. Because one of the issues we've got right now is, particularly with regard to energy, the reasons for alternative energy and the alternative energy sources. A lot of the people that are talking about this out in the media are tied to one particular agenda or another, and you can certainly overstate the benefits and understate the problems with any technology. And what I'm saying is just make sure the information you carry forward you can support and validate. Not to pick on Alex, but if, for instance, he popped up talking about New Orleans not having buried power lines, they actually have quite a bit of it. Ironically,
because of hurricanes, probably. Okay.
One of the problems with buried power lines is they don't react well with water. And so if you're in an area that's below sea level, like New Orleans is, you probably don't want to bury them because it's gonna create some long-term problems. And if you look at where they buried them, typically they're outside of the floodplains. But those are little pieces of information that you want to use, because you don't want to get caught in a dissertation or a presentation.
But that's going to cause it to be more costly, correct? Well, because they buried it. Just what I was saying. It's too costly to bury power lines.
I'm saying your statement was they didn't have any buried power lines, and they do. So the difficulty is if you put that in a dissertation, or you were to defend a PhD thesis and that was in it, you'd probably get shot for it, because the people doing the review are going to look it up. And so the idea is just make sure that whoever you're hearing things from, be it a teacher, one of us, particularly some pundit on the news that's making a statement, take the trouble and just validate it before you carry it forward and spread it. We've got a huge problem, particularly in the energy forums, of people spreading false information. As we were talking, I was looking about all the stuff on smart meters, and there are reasons to be concerned about smart meters, mostly having to do with the fact that they aren't well secured and can be hacked. But a lot of the stuff around them about spreading cancer and a lot of other stuff is just crazy stuff. And you don't want to be, if you want to be believed and credible, you don't want to be telling your kids, your coworkers, other students, or your professors stuff that they're going to easily conclude is batshit crazy, and because it will reflect on you. And so critical thinking is absolutely, we're using the term critical, to really making sure you're well-founded in your arguments, well-founded in your beliefs, and that you can defend them. And the other thing is whenever possible, and you're making a definitive statement, take the trouble and look up the link, because we can all make false statements. There's something called confirmation bias, that is almost genetically embedded in us, where we want to believe the stuff that's consistent with our worldview, and often that stuff is wrong, and the only one to really challenge it is yourself. And so if you develop a practice of not only looking up stuff that goes against your worldview, which I think we probably all tend to do because we got to believe they're wrong, but looking up stuff that agrees with it, because you want to find out you're wrong before you embarrass yourself in front of somebody else that's better founded. And so the other thing is you're making decisions day in and day out about your own life choices, where to live, where to put your kids in school, what methods to use, what foods to eat. Those are all decisions that are going to have an impact on your life going forward. And so always make sure that you're well-founded. Make sure that the science is behind your position, the research is behind your position, and you'll probably have a less stressful life, but you'll probably have a life that's less tied to having to apologize for something that you said online or on social media, which is right now a big problem with folks' careers. Now, with regard to energy, this is an area that's undergoing a lot of change. I was posting my peers here about thorium. And thorium was something that was largely thought to be a great game changer at the beginning of the nuclear age, fell off the map several decades back because of the difficulties in generating plants to thorium, or creating thorium plants, and also because you couldn't weaponize it. Now, to me, I would have thought that would have been a positive, because one of the big concerns we have with regard to current nuclear plants is the fuel could be converted and weaponized if it was stolen, and you don't come back from a dirty bomb. So thorium doesn't have that same proclivity. It also is much easier to dispose of and deal with. It's a much cleaner form of nuclear energy, but it is kind of problematic, and it kind of showcases that sometimes the cheaper technology, and uranium is cheaper, isn't always the better technology to use if you're talking about the overall health and safety of an environment. But the one thing I want to leave you with is just do your research, make sure your thoughts and positions are well-founded on things that you yourself have researched and validated, and that'll make the world a better place. There's so much fake information being floated around, predominantly by major funding sources that have a great desire not to see change. The petrochemical industry in and of itself has risen several times as being a huge problem going back into the 1920s and 30s with Standard Oil. And we get these huge industries that can really warp our view of the world and get us to devoting for and doing things that are only doing us harm. And the only way around that is just to make sure that you're making the decisions based on facts, not based on something anybody told you. And that's it for me.
Thank you for joining today's sessions. I think Mr. Alex want to add some point. I just want to add some point because this kind of content is very much helpful, especially for the youth communities, even for the policymakers. So I request everyone share as much as possible, and if you have a question, you communicate with us. And beside that, World Talent Economy Forum, we have to expand our activities. We have to engage with more of the communities. I know there is a millions of people, those who need our support and those who already communicate with us. So we need to go for the fundraising because we need to develop different kind of softwares, and we need to develop our team and our website to make it more helpful for our developing nations communities. And final thing is that we have our summit next month, 29th and 30th May, on futuristic leadership. I'm sure many famous speakers like today's discussion, they will join in these sessions. So if you want to join and if you want to learn more, if you want to engage with the developed nations who can guide you, the good scholars who can help you to develop your careers, please join our summit. But this way you can grow your community and you can develop your careers. So Mr. Alex, what's your last comments on today's discussion?
Thank you. So that was a really wonderful closing statement, Rob. Thank you. And thank you for the suggestion and the reminder, because yeah, when we have these discussions, we all learn from each other. I learn a lot from being involved in these discussions, and when I'm not in them, when I'm watching these discussions in time outside of this. So there's so much information in the world, and we're trying our best to get through all the misinformation, learn from each other, and progress. At the same time, we're trying to be educators and try to get the right messages out as well as the right information. So I do apologize if I spread any misinformation. In the beginning of that section of the statement, I thought I said multiple times that I wasn't sure where they buried the lions. I kept thinking, I think it was Miami. I'm not sure. I thought I sounded unsure at that time, but that they have done it in some of the richer areas. And then when I did mention New Orleans, I thought I was comparing that area in Oklahoma to poorer areas and poorer cities that might not have the capability to bury lions. So that's where I might have been wrong, but I feel I'll have to look back at this video discussion to see what specifically I said. At the same time, I think I was just talking fast and maybe rambling. And it's early, 5 hours of sleep, and I've never been a morning person in my entire life, ever. I generally wake up at 10 or 12, sometimes 1. But I'm trying to do this to get the information that I have in my head to more people. And yeah, thanks again, everyone. And I look forward to seeing you.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Thank you, Mr. Alex. Thank you, Professor Donald. Thank you, Mr. James Eid, even Mr. Akko Chaudhary for joining today's sessions. Thank you, our audience, those who always support us and support our initiatives. Thank you, everyone.